thank you very much for this great introduction. I feel humbled by your words. And it's interesting to hear you say so many things that I wanted to tell you at the very beginning of this presentation, also to introduce our office to you and to try to tell you a little bit about how we want to perceive architecture, how we want to try to get the urban realm to become something more, something social for everybody, and how we use indeed research and data-driven design to make these designs of us readable and very clearly responding and translating this message to its users and to the people of the cities and the landscapes that they are in. So thank you very much for that. Thanks also to Cher, to Julius, and to the Order of Architects here for having us here and having us here to tell you about our proposal. I will start very briefly with the introduction of the team that we have been working on for this project. One of our founding partners, Winnie Maas, was here yesterday to present. After visiting the site and after personally becoming involved with the project, he wanted to be here, to experience here, and to tell the story that we came up together with the team here personally because of the place that this project takes in Iași and the importance of that. Next to that, we have Gideon and me, who have been pulling the project. Gideon is here. He will be here later today for the panel discussion also to answer any further questions, and the rest of the people that helped us with this fantastic project over these years. These are a couple of our partners and one of our recently completed buildings in Rotterdam, the Depot, a building where we have made the first publicly accessible museum depot. So this is a place where you can actually walk through the Monets, through the art pieces of the museum that is next to it, and see people working on it, restoring it in a great architectural promenade to the top, where we have placed a park on top to emphasize again this idea of us that we want to densify cities, we want to make them livable and green at the same time. We do that from different offices around the world, a couple opening up in the coming days also, and we do that with a lot of people nowadays. We are 300 here together on an office trip that we took to our building Valley in Amsterdam, and we have a broad range of nationalities there that brings a diversity to the office, a necessity in these times, but also an obligation to try and bring together different cultures when you are working across the globe. We do that on different plans as well, from the very small, to the very large, because we think that if you want to make the detail work, and if you want to make pristine and precise architecture, then you also have to work on the other end of the spectrum and to master plan and to make sure that there's an overarching vision into which those details could fit. And this is something that we have found here for the city of Iași, that there is a great potential there currently to build such a framework, to try and see if there's a grander vision possible for the city, and to think about future developments, and indeed the cities of the future. What is the Iași of the future? There needs to be a roadmap introduced so that all can communicate about it, can participate about it, as we are doing here today, and to try and find that way forward that we can all agree on. So these are the type of things that we try to do. We design green and innovative and social places, like this market hall actually here in Tainan, which seems to be a landscape, but underneath actually are the stalls that will sell the foods that we will grow on top of this building. And these are the kind of studies in density indeed that we do, that we try to mix functions and we try to compactize them also in order to make our buildings more energy efficient, make our building processes more efficient, and actually make better use of the available space that we have in our cities, which is becoming more and more limited. And we research to do that. We try to investigate with universities how we can make human towers that are open and porous, that can sprout plants and allow oxygen to go in, instead of the basic extrusions that we see popping up in a lot of parts of the world nowadays. We want to try and see what it would look like if everybody would actually design their own apartment and we would stack it on top of each other into a tower. What a great tower that would be. And by being that radical and that almost provocative, we want to try and inspire people to think anew about these things that we have been thinking about for years and for decades, and sometimes we are unable to think differently about and to be a little bit more innovative about. One of an example of the buildings that we do here, the Markt Hall in Rotterdam, where we used actually apartments to make a fresh market hall in the middle, and we have painted a great mural on the inside of that hall with windows of the people looking down onto the hall, actually being able to almost put a little fishing rod down and get a banana from the market stand and hoist it back up again. So this interaction of people and place and activities there is one of our essential elements. The depot, as I just already explained, And another building that we're doing right now that I want to show you because it is about history and it's about integrating old and new. You see buildings here by Aldo van Eyck, a very famous Dutch structuralist architect, monuments that needed to be protected by a new development somehow because there was an advancing city that was threatening the building. And we needed to somehow add something to it, but still be respectful to the history. And so we created a landscraper that is almost hovering over it, taking a very respectable distance of it, so creating a tension between the two buildings, where you can see that old and new are actually meeting together. You see that there at the upper image, a place where you can walk through, where you have bridges between the two buildings, connecting the past and the present. And I finalized with the building that is just recently also completed, that Gideon and I have worked on for the last 7 years, which is Valley in Amsterdam. And this is actually our more or less our example of how we can make these towers more open and more porous, as we just described, by having this almost mirrorish block that we have carved out, that we've made accessible. Everybody can just walk up here, take the stairs, and go and visit the park that is in the middle of this collection of towers, because it should be open and it should be accessible for everybody. If you make such a building as this, it is for everybody and not just for the people that actually live there. You need to come together in such a space. Just finally, as we did in Seulo, where we transformed a highway into a horizontal park for everybody to enjoy and to reconnect parts of the city. So that is what we do, that's what we work on, the types of projects that we do. So I go to Hills of Iași now, our proposal for the site here, and I show you a couple of the studies that we have been trying to work on, some of the iterations of the ideas that we have, and you can see almost instantly that there was a general direction right from the very start that we wanted to investigate and develop further, and that was to find something that is contemporary on the one hand, but takes its cues from the surrounding and from the history in the surrounding, because that is actually what the site is all about. There's two sides to it. There's a higher part, there's a lower part, there's an old part, there's a contemporary part that's necessary. There are dichotomies to solve, right? There's a contrast to be bridged here, and that is, I think, the main challenge for this site. So we go to the location, we zoom in on Iași. We have never built a project in Romania before, so it was a great honor for us to be able to put our focus on it, to find the natural beauties of the surroundings actually that are here in Iași, and to become aware also of the cultural, almost massive cultural kind of load and layering that is happening in Iași, and all the things that have happened here before and how they are still affecting the current development of the city, but specifically also this particular site. So we look at the site in a little bit more detail, as we have already heard about before, so I'll keep it brief. But yes, of course, indeed, the palace takes central stage here, and it's the part that should be respected and should somehow form the start of this plan. But also the Basiria, where we have been looking at to see how would that fit into it. Also the monastery, with its intricate details on the outside that fascinated us maximally. Great to see what is happening there on the facade and the detail that was bestowed upon it. But also the Cathedrala a little bit further down. And we started to feel the weight and the pressure almost, but in a positive way, of what has happened here before and what is happening here now. And this is also where this duality comes in. New developments are being brought to the center. The Palace Mall is there, some of the new developments. The boulevard has been improved recently. So these things are coming together. Iași is ready to take a next step, is ready to take a new layer to the layers of history that are already there. And this building could become the representation of that and should form a position in that. And you see that here on the side, the difficulties. The smaller grain with the Amazon campus on the one side and the palace and its more monumental elements on the other side. So how to deal with that? How to see and try to form an opinion about all these different, almost conflicting interests. So we started just very briefly on the brief. Lots of housing to be done, smaller apartments also from the brief to be done, which is an important part and that would drive the design. A large public area on the ground floor for all to enjoy, and parking, partly above ground, partly below ground, trying to get it as much as possible below ground to be able to open up the ground floor. And we extracted these quotes from the Julius brief to see how we could every time see if we are actually taking these cues in the way that we design it. So are we respectful and are we honoring the past? Are we making a lively and public place here? Are we leaving a mark for the future without forgetting to also give answer to the past? And these things led to our analysis, first from the site and from the overview, urban point of view. So we have the plot, and we have all these players, these historic players that are in the vicinity and that we need to respond to. Then there's the two axes that we need to respond to. How can the Anastasi axis be given a focal point at the very end. Right now, the square is leaking away almost, and there's something there needed to capture it, but not to end it, because ending it would actually prevent it from becoming an axis that might continue all the way to the river, where future developments are slated to happen. So it needs to be a building that is there, that is recognizable, but porous on the same end. And on the other side, towards the Stefan, it needs to be one of the buildings that are taking part in this promenade of buildings that we have there, with these historical buildings. And what else? The Strada Palat, a barrier, you could say, something that needs to be bridged. A problem, I think, that we need to solve to make sure that this becomes a much more accessible area. How can we reduce this? Possibly by doing one-directional traffic. That could be a start. We can greenify the lane that is opened up. And maybe in further times, we can actually make sure that the whole connection to the palace can be made green and pedestrianized. Because there is a need for additional green. There's quite little, actually, in the vicinity that we need to improve upon. Pedestrianizing, it stops right in front of the palace, and then there's the big car park that we see here right in front with all the asphalt. There's a big potential there to kind of extend this further. And finally, of course, the height difference that we have, the 12, 13 meters of drop that we have, that is separating the two neighborhoods, and that this building needs to somehow bridge. And we put this all together, this map of analysis, and then we add these elements to it, these ideas that we have to try and see if we can solve it. So yes, that porosity to make this a building, but it's also a accessible building, a green space, view lines to make sure that all the axes that point towards these historical buildings are integrated in the building, but also readable. It is not bad to emphasize them in such a way that you can actually recognize them, that you see where the framing takes place of these buildings by carving away mass of our project. And finally, also to extend the pedestrian zone by maybe redirecting the road, as I just explained to you. So I boil this down to our ambitions, to a kind of overview, and as you say, the way that we always present it, in a kind of friendly and happy and optimistic way to do that. So we want to connect, we want to stay respectful to the surroundings, we want to be exciting at the same time. Open up the ground floor, open up the doors of the shops and the offices and the gyms and the beer brewers and the people that host lectures for the vicinity and for the community around it. We want to be future-proof and sustainable, obviously. We have an obligation to the planet and to our future generations for that. And we need to be realistic and buildable. We need to make something that will not just end up as a pretty picture on the wall, but becomes a building for everybody to enjoy. So that's something that we need to take into account. So I get to our proposal, to our design. The way that we always communicate these proposals is by a step story, almost like a little book that we do, step by step, to show how the data that we have collected becomes an integration into the design and becomes a literal representation of the design as well. So we start with the buildable plot. This is where we were allowed to build the dotted line. The road was slated to be there. There is a spot in the middle where we're not allowed to build on, very clearly. And what we did first, actually, is we started to go down. We started to see how far we could go down without going down too far and becoming too expensive, actually, because going down -2, -3 will make the project unfeasible. And by going down, we were able to put one full layer of parking under -1. And from that point onward, we could stack up with a split-level parking towards the palace side, where the height difference is highest. And we could have the cars come in from the side. And we actually chose to have the cars come out at the bottom to see if we can prevent future car problems actually on the side. By having an entrance and an exit there at the same point, you could have a kind of traffic jam forming. So this way of going through it, to us, seemed the most optimal. And so we continue, we cover it. We take the green that is already there from the boulevard, and we pull it over the plot, and we start to make it green. And from that point on, we introduced the maximum program. So not a design here, but just a maximum envelope. What could we do? With a very specific mention here of the plot on the side that we wanted to keep empty. That meant a more compact building on the bigger plot. That meant more square meters on that plot. But it also meant that we could integrate the idea of starting small and ending large, or large and small, whichever way you want to look from it, in such a way that there's something here that is low, that is about the community and about the neighborhood there, and that gives a place for the people that live there that is small, and it's almost like a welcome mat before the building actually commences and starts. So the next step. We take our roofscapes, we start to carve them out, and we look at the vicinity. We see how the roofs of the palace are shaped, how everything is tapered in this vicinity. Everything that is visible on the skyline has like a fulcrum at the top, a momentum at the very top. And we wanted to see if we could relate to that in this way, in a contemporary way, but in a way that everybody can read that this wants to be part of that existing cityscape. And we developed that further. We started to look at the surrounding areas, gutter heights of the campus, where the split between the two blocks is. Can we relate to that? Can we bring the building down on each side to relate to opposing buildings and the heights that they have there to form this landscape almost of gutter lines? And then the next step, to carve it out from the inside, to make sure that the width of the building is not too deep. Apartments don't get too dark. We carve away a large chop in the middle, and we started to make a courtyard in that sense. Still private in this case because it's not opened yet, but that will come, of course. And then the next step, we have this great space on the inside, and what can we do there? And this is where we thought maybe our kind of newfound knowledge of what is happening surrounding Iași, all these fantastic natural places that we have in the richness that is there, this treasure that is in the surrounding areas, can we bring it into the city? A literal translation of trying to get nature to become more prominent in the city. So we made a panorama. We looked around at all the important places of the surroundings, and we put it on the inside. We kind of painted a painting there, a 360 painting of what you can experience in different directions were you to go out to the countryside and see what the natural richness of the Iași area could be like. The same applied to the central courtyard floor, but I will come to that in a moment. And then we started to open it up. This is the main element of what we do. We open up the block, we make it porous, and we make it a block that can only be here, that is connected to the city. So we make this view line to the palace to make sure that that is always framed and visibly done as a view line. We do a similar exercise to the Basilica on that sense, to get an opening here and to continue actually also the access that is there all the way through, and to have this idea of being able to pass through it become very recognizable and visible. And finally, towards the cathedral from the ring, an opening as well to frame that view and to make sure that it will stay visible always. Once that is done, we started to implement a literal vegetation. Apart from the panorama that we have, we wanted to make sure that the inside would be like an oasis, a green place, a cool place, a cooling place as well, where you can find all types of indigenous vegetation of the area, on the balconies of the people that live there, on the ground of the courtyard, on the public spaces that we make there. So this will be the place where you will enter this block and suddenly it will open to you, and it will become this, almost this palace of the people, you could say. This feeling of being surrounded by this detail that will be there will be in a way similar to what is done here. A richness and a layering that is something that this place and this building deserves to have. Finally, accessibility, important to make sure that ramps are there, that people can get in, that the disabled are also able to get to all the plateaus and are able to maneuver through this building. Then on the outside, we started to take our cues from the surrounding buildings. We're trying to look at sandstones, at natural stones, to see if we can almost mimic the shells of these fantastically decorated buildings that we find here, and also apply that to our block. Finally, the parks that we made, I will come back to this later. We have a great opportunity to make all these collective spaces here and to thematize them, to make sure that they have a distinct activity there and a certain reason to go there, whether that's the picnic park or the archaeological walk or the beer garden that you could make in the bottom park. And finally, our proposal, by making these grand openings to the houses, but not too grand, making sure that we align sustainability with the amount of glass that you should use to not heat up your building too much, by making pockets of loggias where trees can sprout later on. We get this opened up block. We get this great carved out rock actually with green on the inside that we want to show to you. So this is what it looks like in the end. Implemented into the building and the surroundings with the plaza here opened up, making a generous gift to the neighborhood there, growing up, making a momentum and making a move more to the palace side, being the larger volume on that side and allowing this porosity to happen. And yes, this is how the views then start to present themselves, where you can walk through and see the palace in the background, coming closer and coming closer and going through this building until you reach the courtyard in the center, where you will see this mural, this great painting, where all the balconies of these people will represent themselves, where people will be able to interact when they stand on those balconies and will be able to enjoy this green oasis that we make in the middle here of this carved out place. The montages, something that we indeed needed to do and to kind of prove how this building would actually embed itself into the urban fabric. So here you see it at the end of the street and how it is actually quite a little bit to the side here still, but once you get closer, it will form that element that you would drive towards, and it will give an exclamation point, albeit a half of a question mark as well. Is it a building that is ending there? No. When you come closer, you will see that it will actually allow you to pass through and to explore beyond it. Going further, looking from the side of the fantastic boulevard, you will see that it will actually hide itself almost behind it. It will not be visible as the requirement was. Same goes for this view from the boulevard, where it will be hidden in between the buildings behind it. And here it will represent itself, of course. Here it will form part of the tableau of this square that we have. More reduced again here, trying to stay low, trying to not become too visible from this angle, and to be a little bit delicate in that sense, and maybe a little bit more refined, to only have one spire trying to interact with the elements of the cityscape that are already there. And finally here at the end also of the road, depicting itself, trying to see if this new form, this new kid on the block, you could say, could maybe form an interesting point where you would want to drive towards and you want to explore and investigate. Same here, where the street and the roofscapes are actually mimicked by our building, and we are adding to that roofscape with a silhouette of its own. Final one from the boulevard, and I move to the public spaces. As I said, a little bit more detail about what we do and what we make. So there are many places that we add to it. We make a kind of drop-off point here, a welcoming square where you would be able to have the car pass by, drop off, drive away, and enter the building from a grand square where you can house activities, fairs maybe, markets maybe. Then there's our picnic park, where we extend already the current very high-quality space with a path and places to sit and to eat together with friends and family. Archaeological walk, we insert a road that goes over the findings that we have in this place, make sure that you are aware of them, that you can see them and appreciate them, and start to think about all these other layers of history that have been present on this site. We have a sky bar. We have places for penthouses on the peaks of this building, but the highest one we feel should be for the public. Should be the place where you could go and have a coffee or an ice cream with your kids and look out over the city together. We have the commercial spaces, all in the plinth, of course, opening up towards the inner side, where you can throw open the doors, where you can have your coffee and your beers, whatever the moment of the day is, and where we can activate this area on all sides of the building, fully surrounding that. And finally, on the inside, we have a courtyard that I will come back to in a moment, a place to stay, a place where you would actually want to linger once you're passing through the building, but decide to spend some time there. And finally, the plaza, almost indeed a place where you could have that beer garden, where there's a small and kind of integrated pavilion underneath a lifted part of the square, where you can get your drinks, where you can sit upon as a tribune almost, to be able to talk and maybe perform as well. And all of this supported by trees, to make sure that there's plenty of shadow, to make sure that there's places where you can sit when the sun is out, as it is in these days. So here you can see that place where you could sit. So I move to the sustainable part of the design, and we have an obligation, as I said before, to integrate that into our plans. And our main goal with every project that we start is to keep the UN SDGs as a guideline for us, these 17 goals that they have to try and make a better planet together. And we do these assessments, and we see where we see possibilities for every project to add to those and how to do that. And so I give a couple. Right? So yes, indeed, we can try to give a greener and more biodiverse place. We can stimulate alternative modes of transport. We are very close indeed to the center here already, so bikes will be the main form of transport. No cars. Let's try to keep them away as possible, as much. Let's try indeed to make sure that we can modify our parking garage and make sure that it becomes something different in the future when these modes of transport move beyond the combustion engine. We can reuse water. We can use our planters to capture it. We can use the porosity actually of the ground floor of the courtyard to make sure that this water is retained and reused, stored in a tank underneath the building, pumped up again to irrigate the planters that we would hang on our apartment facades. We got to make sure that we lose our addiction almost to energy consumption, right? We need to be more aware of what we are doing. We need to make sure that our facades are sustaining this. We need to make sure that we generate energy by adding solar panels, in this case, to our roofscape. And I will come back to that in a moment. And we need to make sure that we make apartments that are affordable for everything and for everybody. A mix is good, small units, medium units, and bigger units together, to make sure there is a certain mix that will allow this building to become much more than just an enclave for the few. Make it sustainable, make it, in an urbanization sense, integrated. Those things we've managed to fixate on. And finally, the biodiversity of things, to have the plant life be indigenous, to make sure that the biodiversity is added on by these plants that we integrate, to make sure that the city indeed gets infused with nature in a very literal way. We started to analyze the BREEAM side of things. Just a quick scan to see where we are. And we already believe that BREEAM Excellent certificate is very much possible for this building, but we can go beyond if we start to look at materials and to look at possibilities to actually also reduce carbon. So we've written software for this project also to see if we can already start to analyze how much carbon we would actually be using if we would build this project. And you see this here in these bars and on the different elements, whether that is embodied carbon, whether that's in the structure. And we have a roadmap already, so we can see now where we will be able to reduce the amount of carbon by making design choices, whether that is switching from concrete to wood, whether that's using reused concrete, right, to make sure that it's concrete that came from a different site and thus reduce our footprint. So this awareness is an important part in the start of our building. I continue with datascaping in this case. Right? We analyzed the building to see where the sunny sides of the building would be and where the darker sides would be. And we made sure that where the darker sides would be, that cores would be placed there, that buildings would always have two directions to view in. And that's why we cut open this building. That's why we needed to have as much corner apartments as it has, so that everybody always is two-directional. Corner apartments are of a higher quality, and by opening up this block, we have allowed this building to have as many as possible. Prevailing wind study that we did, we see that this porous block will allow the wind to flow through instead of hit up against it, where great fall winds would actually blow you from your bike if you want to try and enter your building. So also important to do, and especially also in winter times when it can be forceful winds, this will help actually to make the building more livable and more human. We scripted the facade openings larger on the north side to get light to come in, but smaller on the south side to make sure that the sun doesn't come in too much and that extra cooling is necessary. So this is a building that wants to adapt to its orientation and try to prevent energy use. And yes, this building will allow a certain social interaction to take place. Everybody will be able to look at this courtyard building and to interact with each other and form a community there. And finally, our attempt to make this a new innovative feature of the building, we want to try and integrate the PV cells in the roof in a way that we've done before with multiple projects, and that is to print on them and to have them be part of the shell of the outside, have them have the same materiality, but still generate energy in that sense. So this roof, by adding PV cells to it, will already allow for 163 apartments to be supplied with renewable energy sources. And I finalize in the analysis with the courtyard to look at where the sun actually is actually placed, and we can see that there are multiple places where you could go to. Sometimes the evening has a nice spot where it's warm and sunny, and sometimes the morning, but there will always be a place where the shadow will be and where you can go to if the weather is too hot, as it is now. The facades, a small introduction to where we came and where we got our inspiration from, of the surroundings, as said, of the building that we've just did, Valley, to make a natural stone facade that kind of slowly goes into this PV facade when we go to the roofs. And it would look like this with these loggias that are now there, where you can have an outside space that might actually also grow to be extended beyond the facade if necessary, to have a half inside, half outside place. But this is how we want to have the apartments all have their moments to be able to sit outside. And you see that this facade in this view works like that, and that it kind of drops down here, the building, towards the Emerson campus, and in its totality forms this gradual continuation of the grain difference that we have from the left to the right. Then the courtyard facade, the green facade, and we took inspiration, as I said, from the surrounding natural landscapes and wanted to try and see if we can merge that in a mosaic, add planting to it and add planters to it, and completely decorate this inside facade actually with this curvy and sinuous balconies that every apartment will get. And I will very briefly say that how the mosaic was built up, a very briefly done exercise by us that needs to be supported by an artist when we go there, where we have these elements that are closer by at the foreground, these natural beauties that are there, the treasuries that are in the second layer, and then finally the hills surrounding Iași and the monasteries on top of those that form the background, and together make up this tableau that we made, that you can see here depicted on the inside of our courtyard. A final point about the history garden, and then I will wrap up. Again, a datascape on how we made this. We started with the flows of the people, the accessibility. We started to look at how we could actually have this panorama continue onto the ground into a focal point. We mapped out old buildings that used to be on the site here, the footprints that we found in the archives. We have depicted those, and we also depicted that plot that we are not allowed to build upon. And we, together with the plantation, that forms the tableau, and that forms the courtyard that we have in the middle that you see here graphically represented. Commercial spaces around it, and the lobbies of the apartments in yellows surrounding that, where people will be able to access it by going through the courtyard, by meeting other people, and then going up to their apartments. I end with the residence. Small but important part, I think, when we talk about the build-up. This I already showed you. We start with the -1 with the parking. We go up. We have these parking levels continue here on this side because of the slope. The commercial activities already become into place. Higher on, when we are at the level of the palace, the first residential unit starts on the lower end, and the commercial units are still at the upper end, because those commercial units, they follow this landscape, of course. And we go up, and we see these corner apartments that we made in these towers, and we see the views that these apartments will have. The penthouse is double height, and the sky bar at the top. And they are the apartment division of the different types that we had. And the final thing that we wanted to show, and that is an important design element for us, is that we wanted to have the kitchen have its own window. We have it prominent at the facade. So there's a choice to have a kitchen there that is independent from the rest of your house, or if you want to, you can start to remove the wall. You can open it up, you can remove the wall and make it part of your living room. A choice that will offer flexibility for those that are going to live here in the future. And I zoom out to this winter image that we did. And we needed to conclude with a small addition that we got very recently, that there was an additional part of the wall that was found, and was found to be of value. And if we could think about how to integrate it, if our concept could actually support it. And we have two options on how to do that. Either we integrate it, or we adjust our offset. Simple as that. So we integrated here. We could make this fantastic space where this retaining wall would be visible, indeed, and where you could have a wine maybe afterwards and will be part of a museum. And it would be connected to the commercial spaces above. Or the second option, where this corner of the building actually would need to be modified slowly and slightly to be able to have that retaining wall become visible. And our silhouette we change slightly because of it, but it can absorb it. And I think that's the power of this concept also, that it is able to do so. We have future scenarios planned, as discussed before already as well. Can we see this as a catalyst actually for the area? Can we start to greenify the palace in front and have a more pedestrian area? Can we start to have an access that goes towards the water? And what could happen next? I don't know. What is the city of the future? How would Iași develop? I don't know. But we need to think about it and start to form a vision about it so that we can act towards it. And I finalize with these images of how the building is now perceived and how this space that is going to be for the people, this palace for the people, this almost green cathedral that we make, would become part of the fabric of Iași. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the presentation, a little speedy. Well, the whole thing certainly makes you want to climb it, explore it, and maybe go beyond. We've seen this step-by-step design process that you just described. The future will tie us to more to computational instruments, whether they're parameters or machine learning algorithms. You already developed the MVRDV Next, where you're perfecting this automated design process. Mm-hmm. Whether it's about trial and error, generating forms or structures, or simply experimenting, I think there's nuances in everybody's practice. So in regards to this, how do you go about the creative process?
How do I go to the creative process, you ask about? How does this happen, specifically for this project?
Not only that, because it seems
also
that in all this automated relationship with design, you have a strong identity.
Yes.
And in regards to this, how does the creative process go on?
I wish I could tell you that there's a format in the office that we use. So that would actually make the different projects that we do that are all different maybe slightly easier, but we're not looking for easy. We're looking for ways of treating every project as its own. So the creative process is not a linear path. Even though we have it be supported by the software that we write, it never gets out of the control of our hands, but it's also never very much completely controlled by our hands. Right? The software sometimes gives us unexpected results. Personal opinions sometimes give us different results. So in the end, it's always a dialogue. There's always a clear, open communication, a transparent setting in which we sit, much like this is now, with everybody that we work on a project on, and we start to gather opinions, and we start to gather analysis on the other hand, and we combine those into a model, into a concept that we always want to be clearly explainable. We want to have it be explainable to everybody and still be visible once the building is there. It needs to retain and be shown, and I think that's the strength in the end of showing what collaboratively we came up with as a proposal, and then bringing that forward and having that be recognizable for everybody.
Okay, thank you.
MVRDV has a distinct way, history, and consequence and consistency in embracing the unexpected. I refer here to the fact that your architectural design company actually reinvents typologies, architectural programs. It says why a library shouldn't be an inhabited hill, why a market shouldn't be covered by a blanket of building, why a valley shouldn't be a sum of tower of blocks, why an archive of artworks shouldn't be an explorable depot. So from all these examples, you obviously treat programs like architectural themes with novelty and curiosity. In your view, what would be your proposal in Iași? Nickname.
Sorry.
Nickname, how people will call it.
The nickname. It happens a lot indeed to our buildings. They get a nickname, they get a secondary name, they get adopted by the people that inhabit it and that live in their buildings and surrounding it. We have dubbed it the Hills of Iași now, because we wanted to refer not only to the surrounding, but also to the more wider and broader surroundings of the natural reserve. So that's, to us, it's a fitting name. But to make this the Green Cathedral would be a great name as well. To make it not the Palace of Culture, but the Palace of People would be a great name as well. I think there's many opportunities, and maybe we should do a survey and see what the residents of Iași would come up with and how they would rebrand maybe this new addition to their fabric.